It's been my fourth time now in Bali, and bamboo was somehow always in our minds when it came to Bali. We built already a couple of small structures in bamboo with our small architecture firm, but we wanted to know more, so we did a bamboo course here, and there is, I think, no better place in the world than learning about bamboo than at Bamboo U. And the Buko, and so we stayed a couple of days into the bamboo course.
And working with bamboo for such a long time, is there anything new from this time that?
Actually, we haven't. I mean, bamboo. We worked when I was in China, when I had an office in China. We worked in bamboo because bamboo was as well a local material. But now our office is in the mountains of Austria, and this is probably the furthest location away from bamboo you can imagine. So we replaced bamboo with wood, which is local there. But there is this interest, I think, in bamboo because it is a complete different way of working as an architect. Usually, as an architect, you have an idea, and all of the things you're doing in your process, it is execution basically of this idea.
Right.
In bamboo, it feels more that you are connected to the material. So you need to be a designer, but as well a craftsman to understand the material. So it's more like a playful process. It's very meditative. So you started doing something, building models, sketching, and this process becomes almost your the project itself. So the result is maybe not that important, if it looks perfect like a building. But maybe the process that it becomes a very playful way of dealing with material, it becomes more important than the end result.
Yeah, and was it through this process that you came across modular thinking, the modular approach that you have to your architecture, or was it the other way around?
I think it's the other way around. I think the modularity maybe comes from playing with Lego. And so I think that this seed was planted maybe even earlier than working with sustainable materials.
Yeah. And do you think that being modular like that is central to sustainability then? Or is there, how many different approaches are there to build sustainably?
It depends a little bit what sustainability means. I think there is sustainability you can measure in numbers and in metrics, and maybe there being modular and being able to prefabricate elements of your buildings. I think that is very important, especially when it comes to wood construction, where a lot of the fabrication is in indoor places and then getting shipped to site and being very quickly installed. I think there is a sustainable and ecological part in there itself. Yeah. But I think when we talk broader about sustainability, there are way more important factors that you probably cannot measure in number, that don't get the LEED certificate or so. But just this notion that you build something that is important to people. That where people feel that this will be their home, that they have a personal bond to a place. Because if they have a personal bond, they care about a building, and then they care for a building. So they maintain a building, and the building is not demolished after 20 years and being built new, but it stays around for hundreds of years if it's done well, right? Yeah. And how you create this personal bond for people to a building, I think this is true sustainability, that a building is not demolished and rebuilt, but people have a connection to it.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have when it comes to building sustainably. We see it here in Bali, where people think that by using sustainable materials without thinking deeply about it and creating connection, like you said, to the building itself, that they have somehow contributed to sustainability and being mindful in building. But
exactly. So just because something is built perfectly and it has a good carbon footprint doesn't make it necessarily sustainable. I think the sustainable part, or the most sustainable part in your building, is this one wood column where you tag how your kids grow up and how tall they are with what age. These kind of storytellings in the building that create so much history for oneself living in there. I think these are the true sustainable parts of the building.
Right. And going back to bamboo as a material, recently I've been thinking about the most recent natural disasters like fires in Los Angeles and the earthquake in Bangkok. I don't know if you've seen the video in Bangkok where one of the tallest buildings were like waving around as the earthquake was hitting it. And I was thinking, how does architectural design help us in not only to provide protection and shelter from nature, but also at the same time help us live with nature and not against it. So when these things do happen, they're not as damaging both to us and to nature. Because imagine like that tall skyscraper like falling over, how much carbon footprint and like all the cement and all the concrete that becomes waste, right? So do you think that by using materials like bamboo, for example, can we create buildings that allow us to achieve that equilibrium between shelter and also living with nature?
Yes, but first of all, I mean, the building didn't fall because it was designed for
right. No, of course.
Right? So this already has a certain climate response in its structural engineering, and
yes.
I think that is crucial to every building that we design.
Course, yes.
And then there are disasters that are just these once in a lifetime disasters that not even building differently can prohibit the destruction that we have seen in the LA fires, for example, or for hurricanes. But the problem is that these once in a lifetime disasters becoming more often in your lifetime, right? So they become almost like reoccurring things throughout the years, and there, us as human beings, we contribute a lot to that. And there we as well, probably then the problem starts way earlier, right? How we actually build in our city.
Right.
So I think that is a question of more wood, for example, help in the entire ecological footprint of how we built and what we built. But as well, when it comes, for example, to earthquake, there are structures in Japan that are just built made out of wood without any metal parts connecting them that are there for 1,000 of years. So, so there are ways of building climate responsive, but I think we all need to contribute that. And I think especially when it comes to engineered bamboo or engineered wood, I think these solutions will have a lot in the future of our cities that we build with.
Well, let's talk about wood then. You're quite popular with your cross-laminated timber with your work in Austria. Why do you think people are now more and more leaning towards using wood as a material?
I don't know. In Austria, we always used wood. Like Austria, where our office is and where we are located, it's a wood country. Our DNA, I think it's partly wood. But cross-laminated timber was invented in Austria 30 years ago, and nobody really knew what to do with the product. The good part about cross-laminated timber is, just shortly, that it doesn't expand and it doesn't shrink like usual wood. So therefore, with usual wood, if it gets a bit shorter, depending on how the weather is, or expands, you cannot build really tall structures. So for one single family homes and low structures, and so wood then is perfect because there is a bit of flexibility in there. It's as well good for earthquakes if the building has flexibility in, right? But you could not build big towers made out of wood. That changed with cross-laminated timber.
I see.
Because it's cross-laminated, so it's
Very
stuck
strong.
in place. So it does not shrink and expand.
I see.
So you can use it however you use steel and concrete. Even better so because it makes lighter buildings. You can build then thinner walls because you don't have the weight that you have with a concrete building. So therefore you get more area of useful place. So it makes as well an economical sense, but especially it makes a sense when it comes to health. So for example, you have lower blood pressure and lower heart rates in a wood building, because you're not breathing any chemicals from a plaster that is put on, but it's a natural material, right? And we are connected to nature. So it has, health factors, for wellness factors, for sustainability factors, but as well for an economical sense. It's a fantastic product. So we will see more and more as the building codes of different cities change, more and more of wood in our cities, and I think that's a very good thing.
Yeah, I think Indonesia and its traditions come from wooden houses as well, as you know. And it's just a shame that now we're leaning towards more concrete. I mean, it's for economical reasons and speed in terms of for growth, right? And I completely understand. But what can we learn? And I guess the question is it worth it for a growing country, in your mind, to stick to our guns and try to use wood as much as possible? And is there, I don't know, from your time here especially, have you analyzed like the different kinds of wood that is here, and if it's comparable?
Yeah,
I'm sure the quality is.
Yeah, there's a lot of very good hardwood here in the country, but it's a very difficult question, because using wood doesn't come with just saying, okay, we use more wood.
Yeah.
It is a very long process of planning that is usually pretty difficult with the political system that just thinks in election cycles to start this process. But first, you need to grow forest and forest management. Like, this is where the wood comes from, so this needs to start, right?
Yeah.
And comparable to bamboo, trees just take a long time to grow. So if you can harvest them in 50, 70, 100 years, right, it needs a kind of a different long-term thinking. In Austria, there are lots of forest where we can take the wood, and the more we build with wood, the more the forests grow of reforestation and so forth. So there is a cycle of life.
Is it a program by the government?
Yes, yes. Forestation and forestation management is a very big factor in this entire building.
I think that's what we need.
So,
no?
Exactly, yeah. So the forests grow, but as well the buildings in wood grow, and I think this is a cycle, that just takes a lot of time. Then workers are very expensive in Europe, so the more you can actually prefabricate and don't need to build on site, the cheaper it gets. Right, so you can build wood buildings then with prefabrication with 3-4 days on site. So our office that we are working in, the main structure was built in 4 days.
Right.
It was incredible to see because of prefabrication, and 3 people were on site building it. So it's a completely different kind of process of building, but of course, it's a long-term. It's a long-term process of training people and as well of forest management.
Yeah. No, totally. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit. Because for me, sustainability personally, it's something that I have to learn. It's not like the community around me doesn't really talk about it, or even some don't even care about it. Like, as you know, Bali has a lot of problems with simple things like waste management, trash, just the basics that we need to address even before going to like touch on like sustainability in buildings. So I'm coming at it from a completely beginner standpoint. I just want to know, like, what's your personal connection to it, that you so much so that you want to incorporate it into your work, and what does it mean for you, and why should the rest of us, especially in a growing third world country, care more for it?
That's a bit hard for me to dictate, and what to say about your country, but it's just where I come from. In Austria, being ecological or having an ecological mindset is something very important, and that you actually grow up as a child. So, for example, if I go hiking, usually if there is a a plastic trash or so, even if it's not from me, we pick it up, put it in a backpack and throw it away in a trash bin when we are then in the valley again.
Yeah.
Like this is something so common that we grow up with, that our mountains are completely trash free. You don't find any trash there.
Yeah.
It's a but it's maybe a kind of a change of mindset in a way. And this mindset then as well goes from these little things to as well building things. But of course, it's not that the entire country is like that. And but it's just I think as well how I was raised. Like my father, he was a climber and cared very much what is done to mountains and so forth. So I had this indoctrinated when I was a very small mind already.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your father. I wanna, because in my mind, looking at my own, every young boy has this image of their own father when they were a kid growing up. Like they think that they're a god or something and they cannot do wrong. But then I want to know from your perspective when you're growing up, for those who don't know, your father is a carpenter, if I'm not mistaken.
He was a carpenter.
Yeah, and he used to climb mountains free solo, which means he didn't use ropes, there's no safety harnesses. So he's a very big risk taker. From your view, how did this affect you psychologically, and how did, in terms of your relationship to risk taking later in life, like this culture of, let's say bravery in the family later on give you the platform to just explore and take more risks and be brave as well?
Very nice questions. I love to talk about my father. Yes, he was a risk taker. Like going free solo, it is risky, but as well you need to know a lot of things, that you can take risks, right? You need the experience and you need the skills to do that. He also died on the mountain and he fell, and it was one risk too many. But he survived for a long time being so risky. I fortunately probably got the upper body strength from my mother's side. So climbing was never really in my steps that I knew. But I did other sports that were very risky. But I retired from that part of my life and became an architect. But this mindset, I think, it as well, maybe made me do some things that were maybe not so conventional at the time. Be it going to China without knowing back then what China basically is, or as well designing buildings that are probably not the usual ones, and are maybe something where you yourself as an architect feel uncomfortable because you're not trained in this part and it doesn't look really like a building, and your professors would be pretty mad if they would you would hand this in. But there maybe this courage then to try to do it anyway. Maybe comes then when my father then sits on the shoulder and say, no, forget what your professor said back then, and you're gonna do that now. So there's a lot, I think, where I in my mind still talk to my father and think what he would have done in this situation. And he's always a very good, I think, guiding point in my life. When it comes to that.
Very nice. That's beautiful. So you touch on China.
Maybe one little anecdote there, because of risk taking and so, right? It's so my father he is climbing, right, and he sometimes as well went to the Himalayas, to the big mountains, so the 8,000 to try to go to the big guns. But he always then, when he came back and so, he always said that he enjoys way more to climb in our comparably small mountains without any gear, with free solo. For him, this is way more adventure and way more risky than going up to an 8,000 meter mountain with oxygen and Sherpas who carry your stuff and so. For him, this was not adventurous at all. For him, it was like the small mountains that really took his risk and his
Yeah.
and his passion.
Do you think because it was a bit more personal to him, like
Yes,
it was just him against
for
nature?
sure. Exactly. It needs then to be personal, right? You
Yeah.
need to be in the moment. If your mind wanders, you're done.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you need to focus so much on this. And there's as well maybe a drawback to architecture, that it doesn't necessarily need to be always the airports and the stadiums for an
Yeah,
architect that
yeah.
make a mark,
Right.
but maybe as well the smaller scale projects where you know every screw that goes into the building before the building is built,
Yeah.
that really change something,
Right.
and that leave a mark. So I think that is also something that guides us towards more the smaller and
Yeah.
little and passionate projects
No,
that
completely.
we
I think-
love to work on.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think coming from a film background, it's not the blockbusters that really, I mean, they have an impact, but then it's really the smaller personal movies that can really touch people and change their perspective on life.
Yeah.
And I think that's also true in that sense. And it's just so cool to me, like picturing your dad just climbing and then being a carpenter and then having you as a son and then inspiring his son to like be himself and go do whatever he wants. And that,
For my dad, for example, I don't, when I think about my dad, I don't have this vision of him like climbing mountain,
yeah,
but I have the vision of him sitting in front of the mountain and looking at it.
see.
Like this is what I remember, because doing a first ascent on a
Yeah,
mountain
yeah,
where you
yeah.
don't know what will happen,
right.
he sat there for days, like really going there every day and look and study the route that he will climb
Yeah.
before he climbs it. And it's somehow similar what I said before with architecture, right? That you
Yes.
know basically everything before you climb it to mitigate the risk. But it's also, about the preparation that you need to do for that, and the learning and the skills and the experience you need.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's go to your design process then. Is that how you approach projects these days? How you try to look back from a macro scale first and then try to find your way through it and then start designing and figure out your path as you go along? Is that how you do it?
It depends a little bit on the project. Like I think there are some projects where we just take them because they feel really passionate to us. But as well as, we need to run a business as well, and
Yes.
we need to then have as well bigger projects with a really precise brief where we need to be creative within a boundary, which is also, an interesting task actually to fulfill.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the beautiful part of architecture is that you have this diversity of projects, right? You can work on we work now on one bedroom in a garden, which has about 20 square meter of a building. But then we work on bigger projects, right? And it's this diversity of scale that is as well so beautiful to wrap your head around.
And do you find that all these different projects with different sizes kind of help each other as well in terms of, like, for example, the small scale project helps you fine tune your touch on the smaller things, and then that can get carried over to all the bigger projects, and then vice versa, and it becomes
Yes.
like a cycle, no?
Definitely. As well, certain topics and typologies can be carried over. So, for example, for this bedroom, this took maybe longer than a skyscraper than we designed, just because we did a lot of research of how to sleep well.
Yeah.
In which spaces do you sleep well? Why can some people sleep and why not? Why do you feel in certain spaces at home? Why does it seem to fit the size for a function like sleep? And why in others not, right?
Right.
And this one can be carried to the project that we are working now in Bali, where it is about wellness and about health and about well-being, and sleep has a lot to do with it. So we can carry this information that we have on one project as well to a bigger one and incorporate all of these studies as well then in a project like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, let's talk about your project here in Bali with OXO. It's called the Pavilions. Is this your first housing, the complex that you've ever worked on, or
No?
No?
We did a couple
What's
of
new about this then? Like, what were some of the new challenges that you didn't expect to meet here?
First of all, I think, I think we are in the mountains of Austria, and we build here on the coast of Bali, which is which in itself has similarities, but it also has differences. So I think you try to figure out what each of them are in a project. So I think the similarities, being both of remote places, but being both picturesque. Like if you look around Bali and how the light and the plants, and you can build way different than in the mountains.
Yeah.
But both are really picturesque. So while building in the mountains, but here, and as well here, the architecture doesn't need to be very iconic because the scenery is iconic. So the architecture needs to connect to it and support it. But actually, the surrounding that you have is the main actor in this entire thing. So the project itself doesn't need to scream and doesn't need to say, look at me, I'm here, I'm this beautiful building, and kneel down in front of me. But it can be a humble approach to architecture, like I think Balinese architecture always have been. Having pavilions that were there at a certain location, and how they play to each other on one plot. I think there's something so beautiful and poetic in there, so it doesn't necessarily scream, right? So it really tucks itself into nature and is one with it. And this was the goal as well here, and I think these are some similarities that we have as well in Austria, right? That we also build houses that are humble, but deal more with using healthy materials, creating great spaces where people feel comfortable, and not like empty boxes made out of glass or so, right? But there are also differences. I think there is a way larger connection to spirituality in Balinese culture than in the mountains. So I think to incorporate that, we learned a lot of new things. How functions in a house are oriented for well-being, for wellness, for things like feng shui, or in India vastu. They come from a long tradition, and they have their reason why they are. And so does Balinese culture, how things are located and oriented. And I think there's something beautiful as well for architects then to learn from a new culture. So there is this spirituality thing that was different as well when it comes to materials, right? It doesn't make sense to import now all of the wood from Austria to build here, but use local materials and try to build as climate efficient as possible with these materials. That they store cool air in their walls, so there is a thermal thickness to them that they give out during the day, so you have less electricity that you use than of your air conditioning and so on. So there are like simple things how to build that comes and that are rooted in tradition that we can use as well in a very modern building. So I think it was a super interesting process to use what we know, but learn what we don't know and combine this into a project.
Right. I'm also very interested in how people design not only the house itself, individual houses, but the complex as a whole, and how you can foster community, but still maintaining that privacy for each individual home, right? And I think just judging by the layout, and we'll include a picture here of the render, like a bird's eye view, I think it's very interesting. It's circular, and that, again, each house has its own privacy, but then can you tell us how through the design you want to foster community as well, and how people can still feel connected to their neighbors, for example? I'm sure in China you experience this thing where you don't really see your neighbors so much. I mean, even though you live in the same building, you don't really talk to anyone.
You don't talk in the skyscrapers to each other, right? But you do talk in hutong areas. Right. So this traditional housing in China where community is really fostered. And I think that was somehow the goal of it. So yes, when we buy a house, we want privacy, right? And to create the most privacy, I think, is in a courtyard kind of living, that you don't share a wall with your neighbor. So you have your own house. But at the same time, you're close to your neighbor. So there are areas where you can meet them. For example, in the road and in the plaza that is in the backyard of your house. So there are, like an onion, there are different layers of privacy and community in this entire compound. So you enter and you have a cafe where you can meet people from outside, and then the further you go into the onion, the more private it actually gets, until you are then at the door of your own kind of house. So I think it was really a layer of privacy that guided it, but as well of community. And in the center of the entire development is really, if you would balance the entire site on your finger, this would be where the real wellness part is. And it's not just like a spa or so, it's really a soul of health, I would say. Where a double store place that is on one sense deals with wellness and well-being, but on the other sense with spirituality. And I think bringing them together, it is a very authentic place of well-being.
Yeah, no, it's beautifully designed, and congratulations on the project. I want to step back a little bit and talk about what you said to me when last week we were on a trip around Bali, and we were on a mountain road overlooking this valley with like a beam of light shining over all the trees in the valley. And I remember you generally were mesmerized by this, and you said something that kind of changed my perspective on how I look at light, which is you found that the harsh light in Bali was beautiful. And I mean, as a photographer, I'm trained to not like harsh light because they don't really produce good pictures. But from this alone, that, maybe to someone else, harsh light can be beautiful. And that, of course, ties into the wellness idea of how much light are we exposed to each day, and for how many hours, right? What does light, how do you think about light in your design approach in general, but also for the pavilions? And is it the first thing you think about when you first start designing, or how is that process like?
Light, I think, can just be beautiful if there is something that reflects the light. Light in a desert doesn't do much, right, except being hot. But here, I think the light, it deals with so many different levels. So I think that the plants itself have sometimes very big leaves, which makes light reflect way different than, for example, where we are in the mountains, and our trees mostly have needles or small leaves. So you sometimes get like a very white reflection on a banana leaf or so, which is beautiful. It always also looks almost like it's a little bit wet from the previous rain, so it reflects way different. So I think the light and the reflection you have here in Bali is something specially designed for this place.
No, thank you for that.
It's really gorgeous. Light in architecture, it's very different where you build, right? I mean, here in Austria, for example, it's you want to open as much as possible to get as much daylight as you somehow can get, because we have winters, and there you need that. But it also becomes hotter and hotter now in our climate. While here, I think it's also a balance you need to negotiate. So the interior spaces shouldn't overheat, right? But you still should have enough connection to daylight. For example, for the pavilions, we then designed very distinct roofs that can take out the hot air immediately. So the hot air is raising, so towards the backside, the hot air can go out immediately. It also shields off from direct harsh sunlight coming into your living areas. But at the same time, you have big glass doors that really opens up towards the courtyard. So I think it's a balancing act,
Yeah.
and build, smart with the climate that where you are.
Oh, I think this is very important to know because they won't talk about this in the brochures and all these things, right? Okay, I was looking at the renders and it feels very different from everything else that I've seen in Bali. How much, of course, you're inspired by Balinese architecture and spirituality, like you said. Do you think, when you're designing, do you think of how you want to put yourself in it, for example? I know that this relates to my next question, which is the time of the, you said the time of the star architect is over, and we're seeing more and more like smaller offices with like younger team members that work together and collaborate instead of just having one person as the guy who they look forward. And my question is, really, I want to explore, like, what does ego have? What does ego and its role have in the way we approach our creativity? And is there a place for it? And what is that, if so? And so in the pavilions, like, how much of yourself you put into it is what I'm trying to ask,
Yeah, it's a tricky question. So I think this era where the architect is on site and is wearing, like a suit and the red scarf and stands there for an hour and says, "Oh yeah, this is it, Eureka, and this is what we're gonna do." I think this part is a bit over. For that, architecture is just too complex, right? It's if it would be just about form, I think that's okay. But architecture is so much more. Yeah. It's when it comes to climate and light and materials, and like there's so much actually that goes into a project. Where this, I have this idea. This is a bit superficial. On the other hand, architecture is very personal. It's an idea. We don't know really where an idea is coming from, but it is a personal kind of process. Whatever shaped you as a person, your story, your father, your mother, your what you did in childhood, playing Lego and so, it has all kind of a part in the buildings you're building. And this is a beautiful thing, and this should not be diminished.
Yeah.
So I would say, especially in this project, in the pavilions, there's a lot of me in the project, because I worked a lot on the project by myself on the computer and not just delegated to the team. But on the other hand, there is a team, and a lot of our team members, they also work super hard on the project, and a lot of parts of the project also belong to them. So I don't, I think that, the process might be a little bit ego-driven, and, at a certain point you may need to make decisions, but I think the outcome is not. Right. So I think the project that is now on paper and soon on site is a very humble approach to architecture. It's slow, it's low, and it's a quiet luxury, I would say. And it's not, and it doesn't scream of ego that we as architects need to make a mark or so. We want to make a good building that lasts for a long time and that people feel comfortable in.
Right. And I wonder if this mindset, I'm not trying to discredit your own thoughts, but I wonder if this mindset also comes from your spending time in China, for example. I'm just trying to understand, are we moving away from, Western individualism into more of a collectivist, like community-centered mindset nowadays? And especially, I know that for me personally, like spending time in the US, I was not forced, but taught to think independently, and you can do it, you can be anything you want, and it's just everyone around you, from just simple things like buying stuff at the supermarket to what you choose as your career. It's just about you and what kind of decisions that you make for yourself and how you make your mark in the world, right? And I want to know the opposite side of that. What was your time like in China? Like, what did you have? Like, at first, what did you learn, and how it kind of challenged your own worldview at the time, you know, and into making you into a more like wholesome person?
I don't know. First of all, I think it's very good that you had this education, because in general, you know, to have self-confidence, I think it's a good thing. Like, you know, as a creative person, I lack a lot of that.
Yes.
Right. I might overplay it. But to have like this really, okay, you can do anything that you want. I would wish sometimes that I would have this mindset. Right. What was very interesting the time in China was that there was a very international team. That first I worked in an office, and then my team when I started my own practice in China. It was very diverse. So from people from a lot of backgrounds, you know, and everyone had their own kind of life story and culture that you could be part of, you know, in a project, and that you can inherit in a project, which was a very beautiful thing to see. So but at the same time, there was also, like, on a personal level, you know, there was a kind of being behind a wheel, in a way. So there was never a really close connection to the client, because there was always a bit of a language barrier. There was as well, you know, maybe we grow then too fast, and it felt a little bit like like this hamster running in its own wheel. And in order to support more people, you need bigger projects, and you know, it's like from one to the next, and so where we just thought, okay, that's enough. We need to get out of this mouse rat and try something completely new. And this was then quite scary, because it was just my wife Faye and myself then on the kitchen table, without any clients and no projects, and it was then a completely different.
Who pitched the idea first to move back to Austria, you or your wife Faye?
I'm a Libra, so I cannot make decisions. I'm always, yes, it's fine, you know, but I need some decision makers, especially when it comes to my own life. So in the end, it was my wife who said, okay, we're gonna do that. But it was a weird time, because my father just had his accident and he died. And then my mother is alone at home, so there was always this kind of sense that we might relocate back home. As well, we wanted to start a family, getting children, and I think there is not a healthier place in the world than the mountains of Austria.
Of course.
We are exactly living where the movie The Sound of Music was made. I don't know if you have seen it, but it's very popular, especially in Eastern countries. It's a very old movie, but we live exactly at this place. So it really is a place of health and wellness, and especially a place for raising children. So that we did then, and this was our main goal then, to move back, even if we had to restart everything, but to as well set the foundation for the life that we actually wanted to have.
Do you remember the feeling that you had when either right before you made that decision or right after? Like, was there like a sinking feeling?
I have this feeling at every project.
Oh, really?
It's this panic when you don't have an idea what comes next.
Right.
I remember it very distinct, and I'm reminded by it a lot of times since.
Yeah. No, I want to ask because I also had that before we started this podcast.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that feeling, I try to remind myself that it's that if you overcome it and push for it and then do it anyway, even though you're scared, even though you're fearful, that's where growth will come, right? Like that, because that's exactly where it's gonna. I'm treating it like a signal, like this is where you should go because you have that feeling, right? Do you feel that whenever you have a new project coming up and then you have that feeling then you kind of know like, oh, this is a challenge, like a new challenge for you, and that this project could bring a new.
Yes, I have that almost always, but I started now to really embrace it. Like before, I was very scared of that because I lacked a bit of self-confidence, and vulnerability is not necessarily good to see in architecture. It's a great thing for artists. The struggle of an artist, the suffering of artists. Like, it's good to tell your own story. But who would like to work with an architect if they are unsure what to do, and I'm not convinced about this idea, and so forth. So it took me a long time somehow to be as well open and vulnerable to clients who come. So if I don't have an idea, I'm honest about it, and I embrace then the collaboration with the client, and to intensify the togetherness with them. And I think that worked now, especially for a smaller project, tremendously well. But you have the weird thing about embracing this kind of vulnerable thought, or this panic before starting something new, is that this is as well where success somehow grows out of, right?
Yes.
Like in every project that we work on, I have sleepless nights. I have the feeling that I'm not good enough. I suffer through this entire thing. I deeply panic that and then we don't get paid. I cannot pay my staff, and I don't know where this whole thing goes, and so there's always panic in this entire process. But the interesting thing that also the idea, this moment of eureka that the project then will become, it comes out of this cesspool of emotion. And this is something so beautiful that you somehow probably need to go through this valley of self-doubt. That an idea can grow out of. And I think if an idea comes without that, then the idea doesn't feel right. There is something to it might sound weird, but I think every really good food, it needs to hurt a little bit. It needs to be either on the spicy side or on the hot side or so. If it's like dull and comes easy, then it's not necessarily worth pursuing more often. And I think like with these kind of thoughts, I really embraced somehow these moments of being completely lost in the process, because I know then, okay, I have now this trust that it will come up, and the more I go through, the better actually this idea at the end will be, and the more carved out and polished it will be, because I did all of the stuff that didn't work out, and I suffered through all of the times and sleepless nights that somehow lead me then to something that is worth.
Ah, that's beautiful. Thank you, because that you assured me that everything is going to be okay.
That's the weird thing about creative endeavors. That is very especially in the age of social media, that you just see the result and it always looks good. So things especially in the age of AI now, right? Where everything seems fantastic and so, but it cuts out the failure part and the mistakes that we made and the things that did not work out. And but these are really the parts that we learn from and grow off.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about growth, I want to talk about the future a little bit now. I wonder, so for example, your children are still small, but if one day that they grow up and they come to you and they say that, hey, I want to be architects too. How would you guide them? Like, how would you prepare them for the world outside of architecture, not just about architecture? And what would you teach them about architecture that prepares them for the future of architecture?
Very interesting question. I don't know if they become an architect, but I don't really mind. Maybe they become something way better. No, I love architecture, and if they want to go in this direction, it's fantastic. If not, they will find their way. They're smart cookies. But what I find interesting somehow is as a child taking over your father's or mother's footsteps, it can be quite challenging. I'm now in an age, like 40, where a lot of my friends somehow struggle with this, where their parents were successful in the thing that they did. And now they are on the way to retire, 65 or so. So the 40-year-olds somehow would take over, but the passion is not there. And to do then something just because it is a legacy, it would be the wrong decision maker, right?
Right.
So if my kids choose to do that, that's fantastic. But I think it's not necessarily maybe the question that if I teach them to be an architect, but maybe if they teach me to be an architect. Because I feel since they are born, a lot in my life changed as an architect. If I look at them, how confident they sometimes are with what they are doing. My boy Theo, he's I think one of the worst storytellers in the world, right? Because nothing really makes sense. There is no coherence in the story. The characters change throughout. Then he changes completely topic, and so there's no coherence to a story that he's telling. Yet he loves telling stories, right?
I think you just don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. I lost this playfulness of the story. My mind became too rational, right?
Yeah.
So for him to teach us what playfulness means, still having confidence and doing drawings, getting better with it. I think we sometimes we don't dare to do stuff because of this vulnerable part in us that says, oh no, don't do that. It would look weird what your neighbor thinks.
Yeah.
But actually, we should ask, like, would it look weird what our kids think about us, right? And I think this became way more our process to be far more playful now with what we are doing in projects. We designed a tree house just with the one reason, how would kids see the world, or how would kids see a building? So that was the only question that we asked then. How would a building like that look like? And the outcome was way more playful than what you see probably in your culture and in our culture at home that is being built. So I think kids can teach us a lot as well. I think what changed personally since Emma and Theo now are in our life is that architecture is not the most important thing in my life anymore. And this changed a lot since the days in China, where there was a lot of pressure in, okay, I need to grow my business and I need to be bigger and support more people, get more projects and get a more important project. And now, it's architecture is there. It's a beautiful thing. I love working on it, but it's not the most important thing. So if it is one day, Faye and me, we are back on our kitchen table doing buildings, then this is the way, and it was fun, and it will be fun again, right? But now the kids are there, so this gives me so much confidence in architecture, because I don't it's not this pressure cooker anymore, and I can see it a little bit more relaxed. And since this phase, like, I love architecture more than ever because of the pressure being a bit taken out.
Right, and I think definitely looking at things from a kid's eyes can refresh your own mindset and your own approach. And that, I don't have kids, but I know that just playing around with my smaller cousins, just looking at what they find interesting, what they find fun, is very rejuvenating.
And how little they need to be creative.
Exactly.
Right.
They can just play with anything, and
exactly.
Beautiful.
Be like a 5-year-old who wears a Batman t-shirt.
Okay, I think I want to end this podcast with that importance of play, but also I think I want to dedicate this last question to not only young architects but also young creatives around the world, and the question is, how do we balance that sense of play but also taking care of the business side, and how do we balance art and commerce? Because for some of these young people, most of them want to have what you have, right? Like a small office, doing projects that are personal, that you can feel proud of, while having that work-life balance. But of course, this requires years and years of fine-tuning, designing your own life, knowing what you are and what you like, what you don't. But do you have any advice on how young people can approach this need to play in their creative journey, but also at the same time provide a living so that they can continue playing?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Please don't listen to all of the advice I have to give. But some students might want what we have. We might want what other architects have. These architects might want what Bjarke Ingels have. Like it's a, you never, and maybe Bjarke Ingels wants what the young architects have, right? They are just at the starting point. So somehow, the lawn is always greener on your neighbor's side. Like I have talked with Pritzker Prize winners about their journey, and some of them, they really wished, how architecture was before they got the prize. Now everything is really, they are in such a high standard, and they have now a big team, and it becomes from a studio towards a corporation in a lot of offices. And I think it's so slowly, gradually a process, and suddenly you cannot get rid of this corporation anymore because it becomes its own machine by itself. And then you wish, how can I be smaller again and do like really passionate projects, and I don't have to work on these huge skyscrapers and enormous buildings around the world. Yeah. So I think this, sometimes we don't maybe appreciate enough how nice this kind of startup phase can be. The same it is in other, because you said craftsmen in general, right? If you talk to chefs, if they win Michelin stars, how dense then their schedule is to really recreate whatever their dish is, right? There's not so much space anymore for experimentation and just, I try now today new things, and that you have as a small studio. So in our sense, we try to grow, maybe not at all, or very, very slow. So when we get bigger projects, we rather collaborate with other offices to have a bit more power than hiring a lot of people with the fear than maybe firing it. So I think there is a really beautiful part in staying small. I don't know if you know this story, but Alex Garland, the director of Ex Machina, said he just could do this movie Ex Machina because the budget was so low. If the budget would have been higher, the studio executive, they would have taken away his creative freedom, right? Yes. And it would be probably not a masterpiece at all anymore, right? And it's just a masterpiece because the budget was so low. Right. And sometimes as well in our work that there are projects where I say, I want to do this for free because I just want to have the creative freedom of it. So I think this creativity and feasibility, these are somehow two poles where you need to find a balance in, and I think you find an easier balance in being a small studio or at the start of something where you know yourself, your own tools, and you have your skills to do a project, a small one. There is a lot of freedom in there that you probably don't have anymore with bigger projects. Of course, there are then the Christopher Nolans and so who bridge everything from creativity to feasibility, and the stars that come on the train to do the movie with him, and he gets creative freedom as well in the blockbuster. And you have this in architecture as well with Bjarke and Rem Koolhaas and of these superstars, but there are not a lot of them, right? So I think this embrace of smallness, and especially of this feeling of creating something and starting something, one day you might miss that. Right. I think that's a very important lesson, is perspective, right? And managing your own perspective, and how no matter where you are in life or in your career, you can do your best and make it, whatever you're working on at that time, be the best that you can do. And even though you're designing your neighbor's house, for example, it can be a masterpiece as well if you treat it like a masterpiece, or if you want to make a masterpiece for your neighbors. And that masterpiece doesn't have to be known by a lot of people and posted on social media and all these things to give you the validation that you need to feel like you're successful. Like, what you need is this alignment within you, that what you're doing matters to you Yeah.
most importantly, and important to people around you as well. And
yeah, we sometimes forget this in an age of social media and artificial intelligence. For us, it was very important somehow the location where we can do that.
Yeah.
Right? For us, it was the mountains, and I think this place is such a beautiful space because it's a place where you can wait. Right, and we wait as architects or creatives for a lot of different things, to be paid by a client or for the new projects and so.
Yeah.
But to wait for an idea, and be ready when this idea hits you, I think you need a location where you really feel comfortable.
Yeah.
There's this anecdote of Tom Waits who was sitting in his car and driving, and then one of the most beautiful melodies hit him, and then he said, "Don't you see? I'm driving here. I don't have a paper or anything to write you down. Go bother Leonard Cohen with it." So I think this I don't know, to create a place for yourself where you are able to receiving then ideas and waiting for ideas and feel comfortable with that. I think and feel comfortable for being small and being out of this kind of competition race that look good on social media, and so I think that is a very important and healthy point to be.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Edward.
Yeah, of course.